Bob Dylan didn't just write songs, he wrote the soul of an entire generation. From the early days when his voice echoed through Greenwich Village, to the moment he accepted the Nobel Prize in Literature. Dylan became an irreplaceable voice of America, even though he never truly wanted to be anyone's symbol. And yet, behind those ever-present sunglasses was a life full of quiet storms, unexplained disappearances, accusations of lyric plagiarism, banned recordings, and relationships that were never spoken of in public. Few people know that Dylan secretly sold his entire music catalog for over $400 million, making him one of the wealthiest songwriters in modern history. An artist who spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight while quietly building an empire. It's only now, in the twilight of his years, that the world has begun to understand Bob Dylan didn't write about the world. He wrote about himself in a way the world could never forget. Bob Dylan, or more precisely, Robert Zimmerman, was born in the chilly month of May in the year 1941 in a small town called Hibbing, tucked deep within the Iron Range of Minnesota. Winters there weren't just cold, they were relentless. The biting wind cut through bone, much like the poverty that lingered in the fading mining towns of the region. His family, Jewish immigrants, lived in a modest home with thin walls, where the evening radio served as the only thread connecting them to the world of culture and imagination. His father, Abram Zimmerman, once held a steady job at the local electric utility, but a severe illness left him partially paralyzed. The burden of the household soon fell on Dylan's mother, and young Robert grew up with a quiet understanding of struggle, not starving, but learning early on that life would offer no easy handouts. It was during those gray, narrow days that music found its way into the boy's heart. In a cramped attic room, Dylan taught himself the piano and soon after, the guitar. He'd listen to Hank Williams and Elvis Presley crackle through the old radio, as if hearing voices from another world. In music, he found the only place he truly felt he belonged. By high school, Dylan formed his first band, the Golden Chords. They played early rock and roll with all the earnest clumsiness and fire of youth. Their sound pierced the quiet of Hibbing like a signal flare, as if Dylan were telling himself, "I won't be staying here forever." And he didn't. For Dylan, Hibbing was home, but also a shadow, a place too small to hold the weight of his dreams. In that town, everything stayed the same. People talked about the weather and coal prices, but Dylan wanted more. He wasn't made for a life measured by routine and winter forecasts. His spirit reached out for something larger, melodies that could speak to people's souls. In 1959, after graduating high school, Dylan left Hibbing to attend the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. It was there, in a student neighborhood called Dinkytown, that he discovered folk music, a new world where songs became voices of freedom and protest. He began playing in tiny cafes, slipping into the pulse of a vibrant, questioning youth culture. Then came a decision that seemed small, but would change everything. Robert Zimmerman took a new name, Bob Dylan, a name inspired by poet Dylan Thomas. But more than that, a quiet declaration: from this point forward, he would write his own destiny. A name change may seem like a simple thing, but was it enough to carry him all the way into legend? What would drive a 20-year-old young man to leave everything behind, carrying nothing but a guitar and a fierce determination to head for New York? In the year 1961, Dylan left Minneapolis. No money, no contract, just a burning desire to meet his idol, Woody Guthrie. New York City welcomed him with cold winds, a damp apartment, and nights spent sleeping on friends' couches. By day, he carried his guitar to tiny cafes in Greenwich Village. The crowds were small, but he sang as if speaking for an entire generation. Not everyone is drawn to the spotlight, but those who truly need it always find their way toward it. His first real break came when John Hammond of Columbia Records discovered him. Dylan's debut album, released in 1962, didn't make much of a splash, but he didn't back down. Just a year later, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan was released, and Blowin' in the Wind echoed through the soul of America like a wake-up call. One song, and suddenly the whole country was listening. He became the unofficial voice of the civil rights movement, the face of a restless generation in a time of social upheaval. But Dylan refused to be boxed in. He changed. Newport, 1965. Dylan walked on stage with an electric guitar and sent shockwaves through the folk world. He was booed, criticized, even called a traitor, but he played, and he didn't stop. Sometimes, to move forward, you have to be willing to leave a few people behind. He went on to create masterpieces like Highway 61 Revisited, bringing it all back home, and Like a Rolling Stone, a song that shattered every rule in radio at the time in just a few years. Dylan transformed from a wandering troubadour into a force that reshaped modern music. This wasn't just fame, it was influence. And true influence never asks for permission. By the end of the 1960s, Dylan had hit records, major concert deals, and a permanent place in the hearts of audiences around the world. The publishing rights to the songs he wrote during that time would later help build a staggering fortune. As of 2025, Bob Dylan's estimated net worth has surpassed $500 million. The sale of his entire songwriting catalog to Universal in 2020 brought in $400 million alone, followed by another deal with Sony, who purchased his master recordings for over $150 million. A young man who once slept on sofa now owns a musical legacy worth $500 million. And once you hold in your hands a music legacy worth $500 million, how do you choose to live? For Bob Dylan, wealth never turned him into a showman. It simply gave him the freedom to choose quiet places where he could truly hear himself. In a world where celebrities pour fortunes into glowing mansions, Dylan chose homes that felt more like verses in a private ballad. Silent, secluded, yet deeply poetic. Since 1979, Dylan has lived in a hillside property tucked away in Malibu. At the time, he paid around $115,000, a modest sum by today's standards. Over the years, that land grew into a 6,000-square-foot compound, hidden behind tall iron fences, discreet security, and a thick garden of native plants. No marble gates, no chandeliers dangling from balconies. Everything there was left untouched, like a part of nature itself, wild, still, and free. A small recording studio sits behind the main house, where Dylan once scribbled thoughts onto scraps of paper or simply sat watching the breeze move through eucalyptus trees. The old wood, thick walls, scratched floors, every corner of the house tells a story no one else could write. Dylan doesn't just stay in the house, he lives in it like living inside a song he never finished. Across the ocean, Dylan once owned a place called Altmore House, a centuries-old manor in the Scottish Highlands. He purchased it in 2006 for about $2.9 million, not to live in year-round, but to escape when the noise of the world grew too loud. The 18th century estate was surrounded by endless woods and moorland. It had 10 bedrooms, curved wooden staircases, original stone fireplaces, and a music room overlooking the purple heather hills in summer. It was where Dylan would retreat in his quieter years, reading, painting, or simply watching the rain fall on the cold slate roof. By 2023, he sold the property for $5.35 million, nearly twice what he paid. But profit was never the point. That place was the prelude to a song no one ever heard. And when Dylan left, the melody still lingered in the stone walls. Homes never meant to be listed. Aside from those two notable estates, Dylan is said to own or quietly rent other properties in New York, Texas, and even a small ranch in Northern California, where he retreats to write and paint. No luxury home tours, no press invitations, no glossy interior photos online. Dylan keeps each home like an unreleased song, private, quiet, untouched, to him. A house isn't for showing off, it's where silence turns into music. And when he steps away from these sanctuaries, he moves in a way only he would. No flash, no rush, as if he were traveling through time behind the wheel of machines with soul. Bob Dylan doesn't chase speed. He's not drawn to roaring engines or flashy designs. His garage doesn't look like most celebrities' collections, but if you look closely, each vehicle he owns tells a story. One of his favorites is a 1966 Ford Mustang dark color, heavy steel frame, a growling V8 engine. That car is an icon of American freedom, the kind Dylan sings about, even if he never names it. He's been spotted driving it alone along the California coast. Sunglasses on, no bodyguards, no entourage, just the wind and a man quietly driving back into the 60s. He also owns an early model Chevrolet Corvette C1, a classic American sports car that once graced posters in the 50s. Sleek shape, convertible top, gleaming chrome edges, every inch of it feels like Dylan himself, understated, but unmistakably right. But the vehicle tied to one of the most pivotal moments in his life is a Triumph Tiger 100 motorcycle. The British bike he was riding in 1966 when he crashed near Woodstock. That accident took him off stage for years, ushering in a period of retreat, reflection, and quiet creation. They're not supercars, not luxury status symbols, but every one of Dylan's vehicles carries collectible value estimated today between $700,000 and $1 million, not counting the emotional and historical weight they carry. To Dylan, a car isn't for making an impression, it's a way to preserve the past, a kind of moving museum where every scratch in the paint has its place. And perhaps, like his music, those cars don't need to be understood, they just need to keep rolling. Despite owning millions in assets, Dylan's way of life is disarmingly simple. Not because he couldn't live extravagantly, but because he never needed that to feel truly alive. No red carpets, no celebrity galas, no mansions featured in glossy spreads. The one thing he never stopped doing was touring. Since 1988, Dylan has been on what he calls the never-ending tour. For over 35 years, he's played more than 3,000 shows across towns big and small around the world. Some years, he performed nearly 100 nights at an age when most of his peers had long stepped away from the stage. He doesn't seek out grand arenas. Dylan prefers intimate theaters, where the lights are soft, the sound is close, and the audience listens, not watches. Tickets are never too expensive, no fireworks, no flashy effects, just a guitar, a weathered voice, and respectful silence between songs. He doesn't tour for fame. He does it because music is the one place he feels he belongs. Off stage, Dylan nearly vanishes from the public eye. No big statements, no scandals about spending or luxury, but he still enjoys life his own way. He collects paintings, writes poetry, and sketches regularly, like a lifelong apprentice. Some of his artwork has quietly hung in prestigious galleries in London and New York, delicate, reflective, admired by those who didn't even need to know the name on the wall. One year, he financed an independent film without releasing it in theaters. Another year, he auctioned off the guitar he played at Newport, donating the proceeds to charity without ever announcing it himself. Dylan spends money like he chooses his lyrics sparingly, but meaningfully. To him, real value isn't on the price tag, it's in the things that make people stop and feel. Bob Dylan never tried to please the crowd, and that's precisely why the world couldn't stop listening. For over 60 years, Dylan walked against the tide. When folk music rose, he turned to rock. When audiences longed for romance, he gave them bitter, cutting truths. But time has proven every controversial choice he made became a landmark in music history. He's won 10 Grammy Awards, an Academy Award in 2001 for Things Have Changed, and received a Pulitzer Prize citation in 2008 for his profound influence on American culture. But the highest honor came in 2016, the Nobel Prize in Literature, an accolade never before granted to a modern songwriter. People once asked, why give a Nobel to a man who writes songs? The answer is simple. Dylan didn't just write songs. He gave voice to an entire generation, from civil rights to anti-war movements, and deeply personal stories that everyone could see themselves in. As of 2025, Dylan has sold more than 125 million records. Thousands of artists from Joan Baez and Jimi Hendrix to Adele have covered his songs, and yet Dylan never embraced fame like a trophy. When awarded the Nobel, he didn't show up, no speech, no party, because to him, the highest recognition is when a stranger, sitting alone in a quiet room, plays a Dylan song and feels something change. He never lived for applause, but the world hasn't stopped honoring him, and when the lights finally go dark, what remains is always the most private. When the stage lights dim, what stays behind is always what's most intimate. Bob Dylan, the man who made the world stop and listen, chose to live as if no one was watching. He never spoke publicly about his family, but that doesn't mean they weren't there. In truth, they're the part of him he kept closest and perhaps the most real. Dylan has 6 children: Jacob Dylan, frontman of the Wallflowers, is the most publicly known. But if you expect father-son interviews or glowing tributes, you'll find only silence. Dylan never brought family onto the stage or into the headlines. Because to him, the more precious something is, the more it deserves to stay hidden. He was once married to Sarah Lowndes, his first wife, and the woman whose memory lingers through the bittersweet lyrics of Blood on the Tracks. They divorced after more than a decade, but their emotional echoes live on in songs melancholy, never maudlin, full of unnamed longing. Then came relationships kept behind closed doors, a girlfriend in Malibu, rumors of a quiet remarriage, and then silence. Dylan never confirmed, never denied. He let it all blur like the final note of a fading song. Love, in Dylan's music, never ends neatly. It's real, unfinished, complicated, and touched by a soft sadness. And maybe that's why people see themselves in it. Because who hasn't loved and felt a little lost in his voice? Through all the fame and fortune, Dylan still chooses privacy over spotlight. He's not a man of many words, but of powerful silences. And sometimes, silence is the deepest way he knows how to say, "I love you." Bob Dylan has always lived life on his own terms. But even the freest of spirits can't always avoid the storms that strike without warning. In 1966, at the height of his fame, Dylan was in a serious motorcycle accident near Woodstock. His Triumph Tiger 100 lost traction on a country road. He was thrown from the bike, suffering injuries to his neck and spine. In an instant, everything came to a halt. No more tours, no more studio sessions, no more media appearances. He vanished completely. America was left in confusion. Rumors of his death began to spread, but Dylan was simply retreating, to breathe, to live, and to write. Sometimes, you have to step away from the light, so it doesn't burn you alive. During that time, he stayed near Big Pink Creek in upstate New York, living quietly with the band, composing in solitude. It was there that he created the Basement Tapes, a raw and surreal collection of songs that held the deepest reflections born from that life-altering fall. Newport, 1965, was another kind of fracture, this one not physical, but no less jarring. When Dylan stepped onto that stage with an electric guitar and played Maggie's Farm to a sea of devoted folk fans, the crowd turned on him. They booed, jeered, and branded him a traitor. Folk music had always been the voice of the working class, of protest. When Dylan amplified his sound with loud drums and searing guitar riffs, many felt he had betrayed the cause. But Dylan didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply smiled and kept playing. Because really, what is betrayal? And what is loyalty if an artist never changes? Are they still an artist? By the late 1970s, Dylan once again shocked the world. After personal losses and a profound spiritual crisis, he converted to Christianity. What followed was a string of gospel-inspired albums like Slow Train Coming and Saved, filled with religious lyrics, calls for repentance, and songs about salvation. Audiences recoiled. Many walked away. Critics were left baffled. But Dylan held his course for years, as if searching for a light to guide him through his darkest places. Not everyone understands that sometimes. Faith is the only anchor when reason collapses. But he didn't stay in that religious fervor forever. Dylan kept moving forward. He returned to more earthly music, but now with a haunting depth, a weathered clarity. In 1997, he released Time Out of Mind, an album that marked the return of a Dylan who had once fallen, once been forgotten, now stepping back into the world with songs that cut through time like a blade. He won the Grammy for Album of the Year, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause and listen. After all the doubt, the criticism, the disappearances, Dylan was still there. No explanations, just the music. How does an 83-year-old man still make the world go silent when he sings? For Bob Dylan, legacy doesn't live in a museum. It lives in over 600 songs, more than 125 million records sold, and thousands of artists across generations who've covered his work, from Joan Baez and Bruce Springsteen to Adele and Ed Sheeran. But perhaps his greatest influence can't be measured in numbers. It lies in this: Dylan turned music into something sacred, a kind of spoken truth that could shift perspectives, spark action, and shape entire eras. He never set out to be a guide, but his music was always a few steps ahead of its time. Because some people don't stand behind a podium and still manage to teach us how to understand the world with our hearts. Today, at 83, Dylan is still on the road with the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour for 2024 through 2025, but instead of giant arenas, he chooses intimate theaters in quieter towns, places like Tulsa, Wichita, and Spokane, where people don't come to take pictures, they come to quietly listen as one man tells the story of his life. In 2024, the film A Complete Unknown was released, recreating Dylan's early days in New York. And though younger generations are now rediscovering him, Dylan remains unchanged, as if he never truly left that small room in Dinkytown. When it comes to social causes, Dylan has always stayed behind the scenes. He took part in Live Aid, supported Amnesty International, and stood behind the civil rights movement from its earliest days, but never turned any of it into a slogan. He believes in action, not declarations, and that quiet strength has made him more enduring than any symbol. From a boy in a Minnesota attic, dreaming to the sound of Elvis Presley, to a man who made the Swedish Academy rewrite its definition of literature, Bob Dylan has lived a life like no other. Never asking for permission, never needing to explain,